Hey, Bit 100. Hey, Bit 100, it's Shane. So, this first week, you're starting to familiarize yourself with the building code, specifically the International Building Code. It's important to know that the term building code can be used for a number of things. A lot of people look at all of the laws and regulations and standards that have to do with building construction, with fire safety, and call them building code or building codes. And the building code itself, in macro, the broad term building code, is used to describe a series of different codes. So you have the International Building Code, which primarily focuses on commercial construction. Then you have the International Residential Code, which obviously focuses on residential construction. Then you have international energy codes, international plumbing codes, mechanical codes, accessibility laws that are covered in Chapter 11 of the International Building Code are also broken down differently in state law, which we'll get to in a future week. You've got the International Property Maintenance Code, the International Zoning Code. All of these codes are, in conjunction, taken together, called the Building Code. But for the purpose of this class, we're going to be talking about just the International Building Code, proper term, proper title, the 2018 edition, and that's the building code standards that cover commercial construction and the overall framework of how a building department operates and how inspection runs and that sort of thing. So that'll be our focus for this class, the International Building Code. I also want you, the students, to have a pretty holistic view of how local governments implement building codes in general, and specifically the building code, and how the functions of a building inspector and a plans examiner and a building official work, how code enforcement is done on the back end, and in addition to understanding sort of the nuts and bolts of how the code is built and how the different chapters of the code are laid out and the standards that are there. Why is it important to know the building code? The building code is important to know if you're going to work in construction, obviously, because many jurisdictions, and specifically in California, where I think all or most of us are at, adopt the building code and require that construction be done in accordance with the standards contained in the building code. So on the construction, on the private industry side, you have to know what the building code standards are. You have to know what the processes are for the local agencies in order to get your buildings constructed. What are the permit processes? What are the workings you have to go through in order to get to a building code or a building permit that results in you being able to build and then receive a certificate of occupancy for the building. On the public side, on the regulatory side, you have to know the building code, and specifically you have to know how to work in the building code in order to administer and enforce the code. So if it's your intention to go to work in a building department or for a private consultant or even on the private construction side, but as a regulation officer or a safety officer or a compliance inspector, that sort of thing, you've got to understand how these codes are built, how to read them, where to find what you need. In California specifically, and in most other jurisdictions that adopt building codes, you're required to be certified by a recognized agency. In California, it's typically the International Code Council that does certification of regulatory staff in the building field. But you have to be certified if you're going to be a building inspector or a plans examiner, or if you're going to be a building official or a fire marshal. You have to be certified in order to do that. In order to be certified, you have to take tests to your knowledge of the building code. Now, the good thing is that those tests, like this class, are going to be open book. So you're going to be in a position where, just like in the real world, you're going to have access to the materials when you're taking your test. Just like when you're on the job, you're going to have access to the codes so that you can actually look and see what the standard is you're examining, so that you can ensure that It's, what you're inspecting is done to code and per plans. So the goal of the class is not to get you to memorize the standards of the code. You will start to memorize certain code standards as time goes on, but the goal is not to get you at the end to where I can, rattle off a question about a standard and you know exactly what the standard is or know exactly where to find it. The goal is for you to understand the code and its construction so that you understand what elements of construction the code covers and where those standards are found, so that when you're taking a quiz in the class, you're taking the final, you're taking an ICC cert to become an inspector or a plans examiner, or you're out in the field actually doing the job of building safety regulation, you can work your way around the code to where you know where to go to find what you're looking for. This is not unique to building safety. Before I went to work in building safety and in the regulatory end of the building world, I was a cop. And the penal code and the vehicle code and the health and safety code and those things that we enforced in law enforcement are also extremely large, like the building codes are. And there was no way we could often memorize all of the particulars of each standard. We were expected to sort of understand how those codes were built and where to go find that information when we were investigating a case. And over time, you learn, the different standards, and you learn the different sections, the code titles and numbers and those sorts of things. But it's most important, especially for the purposes of this class, that you familiarize yourself with the code enough to be able to know where to look. So as we get into this first week, I want you to spend time just familiarizing yourself overall with the code. Take a read through Chapter 1. I've posted a couple of discussion questions. Each week I'll post a couple more discussion questions. And the goal there is to get you, just like you would in a physical classroom environment, to begin to engage with your classmates and to engage with me, the instructor, on the material and the layout, and start to feed off of each other and learn to help each other find the answers to things. And then as we get into the quizzes that we'll have every third week, you'll see that you'll be able to find the answers to those code standards questions by going back into the book and being familiar with how the code is constructed and where different standards lie. The only material you need, as we talked about in the syllabus, and as I've mentioned before, is the a copy, digital, hardcover, loose leaf, however you want to find it, of the 2018 Building Code Standards. 2015 will probably work as well for most of the questions. And even the 2019 California Building Code, which is based on the International Code and was just published, would probably also work because it's very close to the International Code. But there may be some standards that when we get into the quizzes are going to be different in the International Code than in the other codes. I'll try to call those out if I catch them, but know if you're choosing for expediency or cost reasons or whatever to use one of the other codes, that you may run into to an issue with some of the code standard quizzes. The framework of the class has us running each week, going through the code standards. So this first week, just familiarize yourself with the code and read specifically Chapter 1, and you can probably delve into Chapter 2 because Chapter 2 is just definitions. And the definitions we will continue to refer back to throughout the different chapters we read and throughout the quizzes that we'll take. You'll also see that there are some Roman numeral sections ahead of Chapter 1 that get into a little bit of the preface of the code adoption and the framework and makeup of the code. Those are helpful to read and help you familiarize yourself with now. We'll also, in week 2, we'll talk a little bit more about code development and how we got the code. But this week, I really think we'll just focus on introducing ourselves to each other, making sure that we can navigate Canvas, introduce ourselves in the beginning to the code itself and how it works, and the framework there, so that hopefully it's not too overwhelming. I'm very confident that the code itself, it will be understandable to you in the end, and that the flow of the course will not be too taxing, and will move along at a pace that really engages you and keeps you just sort of well immersed in the code itself and in interacting with me and your fellow classmates. I'm going to cut it off here because I think you've listened to me drone on long enough, especially for an online class where I imagine you expected to just be reading a lot of stuff. But hopefully connecting with some of these videos, it works better for some or most of you than just simply reading the discussion questions and reading the materials and the primers and stuff that I will post, and gives you a better flavor of the material and gives you a better connection in this distance learning experience. Again, my email is in the syllabus. My phone is in the syllabus. You can connect it through me or connect with me through posting questions or comments to Canvas. And hopefully this first week is off to a great start for all of you. Thanks.